Welcome into the Men Are Forged podcast. As your host, Cartwright Morris. Here at Men Are Forged, we're about addressing this thing called futility in our life as men. This lack of purpose that we feel on a day-to-day basis. Yeah, like you, I felt this in my mid-20s, wanting more, wanting that drive, that tip of the spear lifestyle. So go to menareforged.com and subscribe to the newsletter and find out more about Men Are Forged and finding your purpose. Today's episode is with Greg Oliver. Greg is the founder of Awaken Recovery here in Birmingham, Alabama. Excited to have Greg on. Greg, through his organization, he helps men do a 12-step program and does one-on-one coaching for men struggling with sexual addiction. What's great about Greg and what you'll find in his interview is he's willing just to share his life, his pains, his struggles, how he's hurt others through his own sexual addiction. And he shares some really powerful insights that are really helpful for men today because he's got really hands-on experience in his own life, but also how he's helping other men. He's been doing this for over 10 years now. And he said his marriage is even better, which is really powerful. He gives that little anecdote about his marriage. But you can check out Greg at awakenrecovery.com. That's awakenrecovery.com. Now here's today's episode. All right, welcome in today. Got a great guest on the Men Are Forged podcast, Greg Oliver. I love having a local guy come on, Birmingham guy, helping men with sexual addiction, just real in the thick of it. And I'm looking forward to unpacking his story. But Greg, I gave you that shout out as a Birmingham guy. Are you originally from Birmingham?
Not originally.
Okay.
Originally from Huntsville. So I am an Alabama guy.
Yeah.
But I've been in Birmingham much longer than I was in Huntsville. So I've been in Birmingham for well over 30 years. So Birmingham is home.
Gotcha. Oh, Birmingham is home. So
Huntsville's hometown, but Birmingham feels more like home.
So yeah, give us a little bit just what was your upbringing like? How do you look back at your time in Huntsville as a kid, teenager, and what were some of the big monumental experiences?
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
My upbringing was just the only thing that I knew. And so I didn't really have anything to compare it to while it was happening, so there's a lot of things as I have done my own work in recovery and just getting healthy emotionally and spiritually that I would kind of file under the overall category of if I knew then what I know now,
Right, yeah.
But as far as like my upbringing, I was born in 1970. So I was growing up as a kid and a teenager in the 70s and 80s. And I think that it was a fairly typical upbringing, conservative South. My parents were Christian, so I grew up in the church. A lot of the probably typical church messages around that time period, and they're still around in some places today, extremely performance focused. Mm-hmm. Kind of the mark of a Christian is primarily what you do and don't do. Right. So there were a lot of rules, pretty much any authority figure. And, I guess the main ones for me were at home, at church, and at school, because I went to Christian school from 8th grade through high school. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot of authority from a spiritual background and a lot of rules. And that was, in a sense, it was kind of comforting in a way, because if I knew where the boundaries were, I knew how to avoid breaking them.
Yeah.
But as I've gotten older and healthier, I've come to realize a whole lot of my life was spent living in defense, living in avoidance of, screwing things up rather than really pursuing any kind of fulfillment or purpose or, it was just kind of living with a flinch a lot of time. And I look back and I realize a lot of the things that I didn't do in terms of like misbehaving or rule breaking, it was just because I was afraid of the consequences if I got caught. I was afraid of having people be disappointed in me. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't like spirit-led motives. It was a lot of just self-preservation. So that's, as far as what else it was like, I have an older brother who's a year and a half older than me. We're very different. We are probably more alike now as adults than we ever were when we were kids, but he was a lot bigger. I was a lot smaller. Mm-hmm. He was an all around athlete. I was not an athlete. I was more artistic. Mm-hmm. And so, there was a lot of, being kind of picked on and somewhat bullied by my brother, but then by other kids too. Mm-hmm. So that was tough. And we weren't close really until we were adults, and really not super close until I got into recovery, because that was the first time in my life that I'd ever really been honest in my relationships.
Yeah. Well, there's two things of what you just said that I really want to touch on. I mean, and you just hit on it at the end, the honesty part, but, was that kind of the shaping of masculinity for you? Was being around an older sibling who was athletic, big, that this is what a man looks like or what success looks like? And
I think, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, go for it. Yeah.
So as far as masculinity, I was thinking about that. And I think that there were two pictures of what I presumed, like, this is what a man is. And one of them, I think I got more from my dad. And one, I think I got more from my brother. From my dad, it was a man is someone who just works really hard. Because my dad was a very hard worker, had a job that he did not like. And I knew even as a kid that he hated his job, but he went to it every day. And really, my parents instilled a very strong work ethic in me and my siblings. And so, a man is somebody who works really hard. And then for my brother, it was a man is somebody who is really good at sports, and is big and strong. And I definitely didn't feel like I was that. And so I felt like, well, I can do the work thing, and so I just kind of decided that I'll do the best I can. But honestly, I never really felt particularly strong or masculine growing up, because I didn't fit the stereotypes.
Right.
Didn't like football. I do now, but I didn't really grow up enjoying football or caring much about it. And so I would either be left out or I would act like I enjoyed it so that I could, kind of fit in and be included.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So that's something like the honesty thing is something, as conversations I'm having with friends, clients, as well as just people on this podcast of growing up. I know you've read Jay Stringer's book, Unwanted, about the honesty thing of how we really, I think we do that as in the family structure, don't make waves. Like you said, just kind of fit in. And I think also in the masculine sense of hey, we got to maintain the image of as a man. So we can't really be honest about our feelings, about who we are. And just kind of go on that journey, especially as a young man, especially into your 20s, why was it so hard for you to be honest about your feelings and who you are?
Well, I think that one of the things that made it hard for me to be honest was, whenever I was exposed in doing something wrong, the reactions that I got were pretty harsh. Right. I think that the intent behind those harsh reactions was, hey, you're doing something that's not good or healthy. And so we want to make sure that you know that so that you'll stop doing that thing. So at its core, I think that's a decent motivation. But I think that the delivery method left a lot to be desired. I can remember at age 11 when I was starting to hit puberty and I figured out masturbation. My parents became aware that I'd figured that out. I don't know how. I wasn't walking around the house doing it, but parents can tell. And, where my dad gave a very good picture and model of working hard, he did not model engaging on a heart level. He just, I don't think he really knew how to do that. And so he didn't have conversations with my brother and me about sex and about masturbation or things like that. That was something that my mom did. And it was, I think her heart was in the right place, but it came across to me as very shaming. It's this is dirty. It's wrong. It's bad. God's not happy with you when you do that. And so if that's the kind of reaction I get when I do something I didn't even know was wrong, I'm certainly not going to take vulnerable things because I don't want to feel even worse about myself. Now, I can look back and say it still would have been better for me to be honest about things I was struggling with, but I didn't think it was safe. And so I would just learn how to try to manage it myself. I didn't have a belief that it was safe to talk about it at home. I feared that if I talked about it with my youth pastor, that he would tell my parents. Yeah. And I feared that if I talked about it with my friends, then I would find that I was the only one who was struggling with these things, and it would be really humiliating. And so I just kind of tried to suck it up, do the best I could, and figure out how to present a good image. I just had a memory flash into my mind. At the Christian school that I went to, they had this thing that they used to do when you were in 12th grade, and they had an awards ceremony, which is, pretty typical for the end of a school year. And one award that they gave away was the Discipleship Award. And that was it was something that the people in your class voted on. And the person who got it was the one who, according to the class, most typified or exemplified Christ-like characteristics. And I won the Discipleship Award in the 12th grade. And I was so guilty accepting it because I knew all the stuff I was struggling with, but nobody else did. So I knew by that time how to put a really good, effective, pretty mask on, and one that would be thick enough to hide the stuff underneath that I was too ashamed to let anybody know about. Wow.
God, that is so hard for you to just carry by yourself as a 17, 18 year old.
Right.
So with that, public recognition of that, did that lead to then going to college in pursuit of a vocational ministry degree?
Yeah, not initially, because I had always kind of had a desire to be in ministry. And I didn't really through high school, it was always, I want to be a music minister, because that's what we called them then. We didn't call them worship pastors yet. I'm that old where I was growing up in the pre-worship pastor label, but I wanted to be a minister of music. And I thought, as I was getting a little bit older, I also really enjoyed my youth ministry. And so I thought, well, maybe a youth pastor too. So I wasn't really sure. But my first year of college, I went to UAH, Alabama, Huntsville, just studying music education, because I had just been 5 years in a tiny Christian high school. I didn't want to be in a small Christian college, but it was about halfway through that year that I realized I really do want to be in vocational ministry. And so then I transferred to Southeastern Bible College, which was here in Birmingham. It doesn't exist anymore, but that's where I finished out my degree. And it was in theology and church education with music minor. And it was kind of one of these jack of all trades majors where it kind of prepares you a little bit to do just about anything. But I really did have a desire to serve in that way. And from 89 through 93 is when I was in Bible college.
Gotcha.
That's where I met my wife. She was a missionary kid, and her first year of school was my second year. So we started Bible college at the same time.
Oh, wow. That's great. And so meeting her, did that, I'm guessing, so you did Bible college. It is crazy that Southeastern Bible College no longer exists. Yeah. I remember that campus right there off 280. Yeah. What happened after? So did you make the decision then to, get married, go into ministry, all that? Yeah. When Stacey and I started to date and talk about marriage, I was really excited for, a number of reasons. Primarily because I loved her and I wanted to be with her. But I also had this misunderstanding of my struggle that I was having with compulsive masturbation, not so much porn, but because the internet wasn't around yet. And, I was always a little bit too scared to go and buy pornography, or get caught with something physical. But from time to time, porn was an issue. But my porn during those years was hard R-rated movies that had a lot of sexual content, because I could take what was in the movies and my imagination could do the rest. And, that would fuel my fantasy life. And I was really very conflicted about that. Not conflicted. I was just convicted about it. And I had the same misunderstanding that a lot of people have. And that is that the reason I'm masturbating so much or looking at these movies or looking at pornography is because I don't yet have a healthy or God honoring outlet for my sex drive. And once I get married, everything will be fine. Right. It's the same lie that everybody falls for, because I thought that my brokenness was that I just really desired sex and I didn't have a good outlet. And once I did, it'd be better. And then when we got married and sex didn't fix anything, that
that really was a crisis for me, because I was angry and I was confused and I felt entitled to have this good sex life. Because I was a technical virgin, going into marriage, like just on fumes, just barely, having not done the one ultimate thing. Yeah. And I thought I was entitled to have a satisfying sex life. And so I kind of just went back to supplementing that through masturbation. And then not too long after that, porn came. And now I've got a wife who's going to be really devastated if she finds out. So there's another close person to keep a secret from. Now I'm in ministry where if this comes out, I'll probably lose my job. And so the stakes in the matter of about a year or two became so much higher. And the belief that I had of no one can know was just galvanized at that point. I mean, it was so much stronger. Nobody can know, except for me and God. Yeah. And I just didn't really feel like God was all that helpful, because I thought that God was waiting for me to show him that I was serious before he was going to, reach down and help me. It was just so many ways of wrong thinking that were going on.
Take a little break and just say, if you're enjoying listening to Greg now, I want to just give a plug that him and I will be at a men's conference this weekend in Jasper High School. It's the 413 Men's Conference. So me and Greg are two breakout speakers. The main speakers are Daryl Strawberry, Jeremiah Castile, and Chet Williams. So you can come and hear Greg as well as myself at the 413 Men's Conference at Jasper High School this weekend, Friday and Saturday. So you can go to everbright.com and check out the 413 Men's Conference to register. Yeah, so, I mean, for all our single guys out there who secretly are like, I gotta hold on to marriage, I'll stop once I get married or be in a relationship. What would you tell really your single self? What would you tell him?
Well, that what you're dealing with is not about sex. Yeah. It's not about sex, even though sex is what you're going to try to scratch that itch. What you're looking for is real, close, meaningful connection. And you don't know how to show somebody your heart. And if a guy goes into marriage keeping secrets from his fiance, then his wife, then that is going to be the absolute antithesis of intimacy. Intimacy is not just sex. I mean, intimacy isn't mostly sex. I mean, sex is one form of intimacy that we share with one person, but there's so many other ways that God designs for me to experience intimacy with other people, with family members, with other guys, with friends, and if I don't already know or haven't taken the chance yet of letting people see my heart and risking that rejection, then I don't really know how to make meaningful connections. And sex is not supposed to make you close to somebody. It's supposed to come out of the closeness that's already there. Wow. And I just had a backwards view of what it was supposed to accomplish. And so I would say to my single self, married sex doesn't fix anything. But single experiences with sex and porn and masturbation and fantasy are going to potentially wreck your opportunity to have good, connected, safe, trusting, intimate sex with your spouse whenever that happens. And if you use a lot of porn, by the way, you might have trouble getting an erection on your honeymoon.
Wow. Yeah. Dang. That's right there.
Not to put too sharp a point on it.
So you've mentioned this twice, Greg, and I would love for my listeners, especially the men out there, of understanding when you say fantasy in our fantasy life. Yeah. And how we develop that and how we can curb that and what's healthy, what's not, and all that. Yeah.
Whew, that's a big topic and a big question. I mean, I think that fantasy in the way that I experienced it, which was really super unhealthy. And I think often fantasy is unhealthy because it's pulling me out of reality. I'm using it to try to escape the reality of where I am. I would fantasize about what would it be like to be sexually desired, because I didn't feel that. But you know what? That wasn't about my wife. That goes all the way back to when I was a little shrimpy kid who wasn't good at sports, who looks at all these other boys who've got like ab muscles that I don't have, and they're taller than me, and they've got, just defined bodies that I don't have. And like, I'm jealous, I'm envious of that. And I'm thinking, well, that's what women want. And that's what's in porn. Yeah. And so the fantasy of being sexually desired is not about connection. It's about a false connection. Like, if I have true intimacy with my wife, it really doesn't matter what I look like, or how my body compares to somebody else's body, or how her body compares to somebody else's body, because whatever sex is between us, that's ours. We own it. And it doesn't have to be like or look like anything else in order for me to be fully and totally satisfied. But one of the things that porn does is it breeds dissatisfaction. It sets up this completely unrealistic view of what sexuality is, and it gives you an opportunity to watch it in such a way as to put yourself, like, through a point of view experience, as if you are in the porn that you're watching. And that just takes over and hijacks the brain. And so, sometimes fantasy would show up when I was in a context when I didn't have the opportunity to act out physically. I would just bide my time and get those hormones and neurotransmitters firing in preparation for when I did have opportunity. Another thing, Cartwright, that fantasy did that was so destructive was it inched me closer to that line, the ultimate line that I said I would never cross, which was, yes, I'm hiding things from my wife, and yes, I'm using porn, but I'll never physically cheat on her. Like, that was the line I was never going to cross. And from where I started to that line was a huge leap that I never would have made. But through fantasy, what my brain is doing is it's overcoming the objections and figuring out, like, what way of cheating would feel least like cheating. And it's like kind of working out and getting over those inhibitions so that by the time I did it, it wasn't a giant leap. It was just the next step. And that was the thing that was so devastating, was to driving home from the first time I physically acted out with somebody other than my wife, was having the thought, I cannot believe I just did that. And then the next thought was, I wonder how long it's going to be until I do it again.
Today's episode is brought to you by Thrive Marriage Lab. If you want your marriage to thrive, this is a great opportunity to you, because strong marriages are the bedrock of strong churches, organization, families, and community. This is a 12-month pathway for any of you that are looking to really have weekly engagement with experienced marriage counselors. Not just one, but many. So go to restory.life/thrive to get on the waiting list for this great program that starts in April. That's restory.life/thrive. And make sure you put the word Forge in the promo code to receive a discount on your monthly fee. Now, back to the episode. Wow. So, unpack that a little bit for us, Greg, of really how men, we think we can compartmentalize it in our brains. Because I know many of men, like, when they have to, whether they get caught or they end up sharing with their wife, they've been looking at pornography and masturbating. There's this, like, they don't expect a reaction of, oh, you cheated on me, but that's what it resonates with women.
Right.
And why do we as men somehow compartmentalize? That's not cheating, because it will event, like you said, it led to it.
Yes.
So help us understand the differences and why women register it different than we do.
Well, if I don't think that I can stop, then I have to find a construct where I can rationalize and live with the tension that I've created. Mm-hmm. If I'm a Christian, because I was a Christian when all this was going on, and I have the Holy Spirit lovingly speaking truth to me, like, Greg, this is not it. This is not my best for you. Like, I want more for you. Mm-hmm. I didn't hear it that way or receive him that way. Yeah. It was more like, you're a terrible, horrible, dirty person. I heard other voices in that, but I've got the Holy Spirit saying, this is not going to get you what it's promising. But then I've got my self-conditioned, habits neurologically. I am hooked. And if I don't think I can stop, then I've got to at least try to manage it and do it in such a way that, well, at least I'm not XYZ. But listen, a year into our marriage, My wife came home from work before I expected her to, and I was in the shower masturbating, and she heard me. And you would have thought that she walked in on me in bed with another woman. Mm-hmm. Like that would have been like her reaction was that dramatic. It was infidelity to her. It was cheating on her because she didn't have a framework that she wasn't enough. And it's very, very hard for our wives to understand that it's not necessarily dissatisfaction with them why we're doing it. Right. Most men have had a much longer relationship with porn in their own bodies than they've had with their wives. Mm. And so when we've conditioned ourselves over years and years and years to expect and experience sex in a certain way, then we get married, our bodies and our brains have to adjust because as sad as it sounds to say, sex with our wife might not initially feel as good as what we've been doing because we're just so in a zone of this is how I do it. I think it's also important for me to say something I didn't say up to this point in that why was I going to porn and masturbation in the first place? Because I think that for a lot of young men now, it starts with just normal biology and curiosity plus opportunity, right? Because anybody who's hitting puberty is going to be feeling arousal and desire. And when they discover their own body, masturbation is just a normal, natural thing that people are going to try. I mean, it just is. Say what you will and hold whatever position you want to in terms of the morality of it. It is normal. Even if you don't think it's acceptable, it is normal. But what starts out as normal and maybe just run-of-the-mill curiosity, it became for me very quickly a way that I could escape any unpleasant emotion that I was feeling. The primary one for me was stress. If I ever felt overwhelmed or anxious or stressed out about my situation, I hated the way that felt. And I grew up in a culture of easy answers. Well, just pray about it and it'll be better. Well, I would pray about it and I wouldn't feel any better sometimes. And so then I would masturbate and I'd feel a lot better. Yeah. not for very long, but while I was doing it. But then after a while, it became clear to me, probably around my sophomore year of high school, that this is getting out of control. Like this is something that's beginning to control me. But by that point, I was kind of hooked on it. But stress was the number one contributor. For a lot of people, it's trauma. For a lot of people, it is just uncertainty or realizing that you're out of control in the situations in your life. Could be coming out of, broken relationships. Most people who get addicted to pornography, it's not just because they enjoy the experience so much. Because there's a lot of people who have used porn and not been addicted to it, who you look back at their stories and they did have healthy outlets to talk about their problems. They did have good connection and a place where they could be honest. And so it wasn't ever healthy when they used it, but they weren't using it instead of real relationships. And so they did have some good connection and then they didn't get addicted. And so, you've probably seen like the TED talk that Johann Hari did on Everything You Know About Addiction is Wrong, where the big culminating line he says is that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection. Like that's so key is if we do have places where we can take that stress, where we can take those feelings and process them without judgment, with understanding, it just takes a lot of the power away from the thing that has the potential to be addictive. Now, it doesn't take all the power away. I still have to make choices, but it's a lot easier to make those choices when I'm not making them in isolation.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, I mean, for so many of us, like we're exposed at a young age. And like you said, it felt good. Like as a kid, like, oh, this feels good. And especially it's a release and escape from bad feelings.
Yep.
How would a young man who doesn't know how to voice issues? What was something that you needed as a kid? Like you said, connection. Is it a parent asking you a question or is
I needed to be taught how to do that because it's not going to come naturally to a kid to most of the time. It's not going to come naturally to just be very expressive and clear with this is what I need. There are things that all kids need from their parents. I mean, we all need our parents to be attuned to us, to notice what we're going on. We need them to be responsive to us. We need them to, to be able to regulate our emotional arousal. Like if we're bouncing off the walls, we need them to teach us how to calm ourselves down healthily. If we're sluggish, we need them to teach us how to get up and move around and get active. Mm-hmm. We need them to be able to handle negative emotions. We need them to come and apologize when they've made a mistake so that we learn all those skills. Right. I mean, that's all a part of healthy attachment and being grounded. And when I think a lot of my peers didn't have that with consistency, we're left to figure out how to do that on our own. Well, take that scenario, apply it to a preteen or an early teen boy who all of the instinctive pleasure-seeking parts of his brain are fully developed, but his prefrontal cortex, which makes good decisions, still has about a dozen years of growing up left to do. Right. And what do we think is going to happen? We are not going to fall into healthy patterns. We have to be taught healthy patterns, and they have to be reinforced. And one of the things that I think would have been the most helpful would have been things that we've tried since I've been in recovery to say to our kids is, you can bring anything to me. And if you're bringing it to me, I'm not going to freak out. You're not going to get in trouble. I will help you with whatever you bring to me. Not promising there won't be consequences, because some things just come with consequences, but it will not be punishment. It will not be anger or disappointment. And we've got to say that. And even if we say it, our kids aren't always going to believe it or trust it. Right. But at least we can say, hey, I've set that table. Whether they choose to come and sit at it is up to them. But there's no doubt in my mind that they know. Like one of our kids, when they were a little bit older, shared with us some things that they'd been struggling with. I'm being ambiguous just because I don't want to identify which of our kids it was. And one of the things that my wife said was, did you not feel like you could come to us with that? And the answer was, oh, I knew I could. I knew 100%. I just wasn't ready. And so that was really reassuring for us, because when that child was ready, they did bring it to us. Right. And so that was really, really helpful to know that as a parent, okay, none of us were raised by perfect parents. None of us who are parents are going to be perfect parents. We're going to put it in the ditch, but that's why, recognizing our failures, acknowledging them to our kids, it makes them feel safer. And I wish I would have had a little bit more of a context that I don't think many kids had at the time I was growing up, which was true openness and safety to ask questions about anything. That would have helped a lot.
Yeah. Because as a kid and even as an adult, I'm already feeling so much shame. Why would I bring it to a parent or authority figure to experience more pain or more shame?
Well, yes. Yeah. And think about that now with people who are adolescents right now in 2022. If I had a question and I didn't think I could ask my parents, I had to either look it up in the encyclopedia, or I had to talk to a friend about it, or I had to find a magazine article. Well, now I can find out a really terrible answer in about 3 seconds.
Right.
But I don't know it's a terrible answer because it seems somebody's saying it with authority. And that's kind of the message. Yeah. Someone is going to be the sexual authority in a child's life. Yeah. Is it going to be the parent, or is it going to be pornography? Because pornography is raising their hand saying, I'll take that job. And when we're hesitant, it's kind of like what Jay says in Unwanted, we collude with the porn industry by our silence and by our negative messaging, like by saying, oh, don't have sex. It's really dangerous. It's like, try learning how to be a great cook if all you ever hear about is food poisoning. That's a quote from the book. So I think that a lot of Christian parents are really afraid to talk about sex positively with our kids because we're afraid it's going to make them want to do it. Well, newsflash, that ship's already sailed. They already want it. They need somebody who's going to talk about it unembarrassed and giving them the right information. Mm-hmm. And if we're not willing to do that, then we're basically abdicating our role to people who are going to do a lot of damage.
Yeah. Like you said, your upbringing as well as mine, we didn't have this. And this just creates a whole new playing ground, and therefore it's almost even being more vigilant than before. So, Greg, so I'd love to just jump back into your story.
Sure.
What was the humbling moment? So I know that's coming of when I really had to look myself in the mirror and address this, hit it head on.
Well, yeah. And I don't have one of those stories where I said, I can't live with this anymore. I'm going to confess.
Yeah.
I've spent a lot of time being envious of people that did that. But I've really reconciled that that's just not my story. That's not the story that God was writing for me. The stakes were too high. And I really believed by the time I had crossed that flesh barrier and had repeatedly over about a 6-year period of time, been sexual with so many people other than my wife, that there was no coming back if it was exposed. And so my commitment was to just run out the clock and just try to never get caught. And I was 38. And that was either a long time to run out the clock or a very fatalistic approach, like, God, just take my life. I mean, a couple of times I prayed that he would take my life because I was so tired of carrying it. And, I knew I was hopelessly addicted, and I knew I was never going to tell anybody. And so I prayed that he would kill me. I prayed that he would fix me. I prayed ultimately that he would cause me to get caught, not wanting that to happen, but actually praying that sort of in a manipulative sense, like, well, maybe that'll be so impressive to God that he'll just cure me, That was actually the prayer that he answered. And through the missending of an email to an acting out partner that I sent by mistake from my church email account, that was how everything kind of blew up. And I was exposed. And this was January of 2009. I had been in ministry for about 15 years. I've been married for 17 years. In fact, everything hit the fan 2 days after our 17th wedding anniversary. And, Stacey had no clue that anything might have been going on other than masturbation, which she was always very fearful of. Yeah. And so for about the first week after I got caught, because I got caught with a fraction of what I'd actually done. I mean, it was enough for me to lose my job and to get into counseling and, to recognize I needed to be seeking recovery. But I was going to hold all the rest of this stuff and never let that out, because I'm like, well, look, the damage is done. There's no need for the damage to be worse. And my narrative was, I'm trying to protect her. I was really trying to protect myself. Yeah. But God was not satisfied to only partially heal me. And so he just kind of almost killed me in order to save me. And I felt after about a week, like I was physically going to die if I didn't come out with it. And so finally I did confess to the rest of what I had done. And it was awful. It was horrendous. I had an experience where I felt like I felt like the way I'd imagine it being if you had been possessed by 1,000 demons and they were all coming out of your body at the same time. Like it was, I couldn't breathe. I was on the floor in the fetal position and I thought I was going to die. And then at the end of a few minutes of just wailing, this amazing calm came over me. And it's like, it's out. Like I have no more secrets. And I was 38 years old, and it was the first time in my life that I could remember living without a secret. And that was when things started to change. I had already started therapy a week earlier. Now I started therapy from a place of honesty, and, everything started to change. I was able to figure out how the parts of my story fit together to kind of predict that this might have been where I ended up. My wife was able to see that this really wasn't about her, even though it deeply affected her. She was able to receive God's grace, to give me grace and not leave. She was completely justified in divorcing me, but she chose not to. And I'll always be grateful for that. And we began to seek more understanding. Went back to therapy, came to understand sexual addiction more, found a community of other people who were recovering from addiction. I got a sponsor. I just started kind of, working recovery. I didn't know what working recovery meant when I started, but I figured somebody would tell me. And so I kind of figured it out as I went. And it was really funny because early on, my desire was, let's get this recovery stuff taken care of, so that I can prove to everybody how I'm back and I'm ready to get back into ministry. And it was funny because ministry was such an idol and such a part of my identity that I needed to get back to that, like to prove to everyone that I wasn't this person that that you heard about. That's not what's going to define me. And after a couple of years of recovery and sobriety, God was able to shift, I think, the focus in my heart to, what if I don't ever give you back church ministry? Like, is it enough just to be my child? And my answer was no. No, it's not enough. I need that. Plus I need to be back in ministry. Mm-hmm. And that was when God kind of impressed on me. It's like, now you know what is the next thing for us to work on. We need to work on who you are as my child. And so over the next few years, my desire to minister didn't go away, but it was really refocused. And God changed my heart and moved it in the direction of, I want to serve and help and minister to people who are walking through the same thing that Stacey and I went through.
Yeah.
And I started getting that opportunity even while I was doing other jobs, like working at Chick-fil-A or working at the bank or selling cars. And people would hear what I'd gone through, and they'd get my phone number and they'd call me, and I'd find myself at O. Henry's or Starbucks sitting across the table, swapping stories.
Yeah.
And just loving how that felt to be able to give hope to another person, because like I had been in their seat, but now I was down the road and I could tell them, stay in it. It's not always going to be like this, and to take what I'd had invested in me and invested in others. And so that's kind of what turned into the desire to do recovery as a ministry. Yeah. And ultimately, in 2015 turned into what we're doing now with Awaken.
Yeah. So awakenrecovery.com. If anyone wants to check that out, if that's what Greg just described, you resonate with, you can go check that out, what that looks like. But yeah, Greg, I mean, just for the men out there, what does recovery look like from sex addiction? What did that look like for you? And something that you could, would really be needed for the men out there that are going through something like that?
That's a great question. And, the answer to what does recovery look like is going to vary depending on who you're talking to. I think there's some general things that most recovery communities would agree with, that this needs to be a part of it. Things like therapy, having a recovery community, learning some new disciplines on how to live your life. And, I use the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous because they work with any kind of addiction. Things like that, and also how to bring God into it. And so the way when men come to an Awaken meeting, one of the things that we use to illustrate is this model that we call the 4S model. It's just 4 words that start with the letter S. We start with sobriety, because that, while it's not the be all end all, it is kind of the square one where people find themselves like, I'm at this meeting because I want to stop using porn, or I want to stop having affairs, or I want to stop compulsively XYZ. And that's a great initial motivation. Like, wanting to be sober is a fantastic reason to start a recovery journey. Mm-hmm. And so what we do is we help people identify, how do you act out? What are the contexts? What are things you can change, put in place to make it harder for you to act out? So let's start there.
Yeah.
But understand that you've been acting out for a reason. You've had a legitimate need that you've been trying to meet in an unhealthy way. When that unhealthy way is gone, that need is still there. And so sometimes you're going to feel worse, not better, early in recovery. And so the thing right after sobriety is structure. We want to help replace the acting out behavior with healthy, life-giving, purposeful things. So what do I love to do? Some of the things are going to be very specific to recovery, like going to meetings, going to counseling, getting a sponsor, working the 12 steps. But we can't do that all the time, or it's going to be exhausting. We've got to go play Frisbee with friends, go out to dinner, go to a concert of an artist that I love, having good heart-to-heart check-in conversations with my wife if I'm married. What are things that make me feel alive and connected to God, to myself, and to other people? So sobriety, replacing acting out with structure, and then surrender is the third S, because a big question for Christians is, why have I not felt like I could really connect with God through all of this? Like, I've prayed that he would take it away and he didn't. Is God mad at me? Am I mad at him? Do I even believe in him? Do I think that he's powerless over this? And if we look into our stories, which counseling helps a lot with that, we can realize the way that I see God was often very much shaped by the other authority figures in my life and messages that I got about God. And so maybe the way I've seen God all along was not really God, or not an accurate picture of him. When I begin to see that God is for me, that he wants my health and my freedom more than I do, and that he's never been angry with me, he's always just wanted better things for me, and that he's ready to engage, then that's a God that I can be willing to surrender my life to, which the 12 steps talk about. Made a decision to surrender our will and our lives, hand it over to the care of God as we understood him. Well, if I understand God as being pissed or distant, why would I turn my will and my life over to the care of a God like that? But if I see him as loving and gracious and merciful and tender and understanding, well, naturally, I'm going to want to surrender to a God like that. So sobriety, structure, surrender. And then we have this diagram, and around all those things is this container that we draw. And the fourth S is support, because sexual addiction is an intimacy disorder. I'm looking for connection through counterfeit, isolated activities. You're not going to be intimate when there's no other people involved, right? Whether that's masturbating by yourself or whether that's having anonymous sex with people that you're not in a relationship with. It's a very isolated, non-intimate way of living. And so the support of people who have been where I am and can walk alongside me and not judge me and really be there for me, that is absolutely invaluable, because I can share anything that I'm thinking or feeling or have done in a meeting, and they're going to say, man, thanks for sharing. I'm really glad you're here. And I'm thinking, well, are you not going to tell me what I did wrong? And they're thinking, I'm sure you probably already know that part. Like, you need a place where it's safe to tell the truth, where you can tell the truth without worrying about the recoil, of what's going to happen to you. And so support is really, really critical. So I would say those aspects, sobriety, finding healthy structure, connecting with God, and doing that within a community of support are really critical parts of a recovery lifestyle.
Yeah.
So when people come to our meetings, that's the way we present it. Other communities really say similar things, but maybe using different pictures or words. But it's kind of variations on a theme, I think, a lot of the time.
Yeah. Man, that's good. Thank you, Greg, for that. That's helpful. One question I have that I keep hearing is I would love to hear, because I think for any human being out there is that journey of finding your identity in God and what that looked like for you, especially a guy like you said. I mean, this is a lot of men resonate. Like, your identity was in being in leadership at a church.
Yep.
That was your identity. This is what makes me a man or successful, or where are you guys identity from?
Yeah. Achievement, success, holiness, all those things. And one of the things that was kind of a light bulb moment for me was when I read a book by Steve Brown called The Scandalous Freedom. And it's not about addiction or recovery. It's really about grace. And like, what does the Bible mean when it says that we are free? And it is for freedom that Christ set us free. Because a lot of times in the church, we're scared to death of the concept of freedom.
Yeah.
We're like, oh, no. It's freedom from sin, not freedom to sin. And Steve Brown says, no, I'm calling bullcrap on that, because if it's not freedom to do it wrong, it's not freedom.
Yeah.
And the thing, realizing that my whole life, there's one of his chapters that talks about the quest to be better. Like, I'm just trying to be better, to be a better person, to be a better Christian. And Steve talks about when he realized that if he never got any better than he was right now, that Jesus would still love him and be for him. Like, so getting better is not the point. What Jesus has done for me already is the point. And that's when he said he started getting better, when he quit trying so hard. Right. When he started trusting in what has already been done for him, and that his identity is not as a human doing, but just as a human being. Like, I was created as a fully authentic, loved, valuable person. And I don't have to do anything to make myself more valuable or lovable. But that's not the message that our world teaches us. And so to learn that the world's message is toxic and God's message is so foreign to many of us, to be reacquainted, or maybe acquainted with for the first time, with the message of, you can't do anything to make me love you more than I do right now. And you can't do anything to make me love you less than I do right now. It's not about what you do. What you do comes when you start believing what I say is already true about you. And, that was a complete paradigm shift for me, that the behavior and the holiness, that's something I can't accomplish. That's something that God has to do through my surrendering control of my actions to him. And if I do that, that takes the pressure off. Like, my holiness, Jesus, is your job. My job is just letting you do it, and not fighting you so much. So that's been really helpful, not only with maintaining sobriety, with staying on the path of recovery, but just living life with less stress and pressure, with less anxiety. Like, what if I fail? Like, there was a time that I almost got fired from my job selling cars because of a huge mistake that I made. Well, before recovery, I would have done everything to cover up that mistake, not let anybody know that I had made it. Well, in this one, and this is not a pat on the back, this is just the way I learned I needed to live. I go to my boss and I say, hey, I've made a terrible mistake, and we might lose this deal over it. And he was furious, and he threatened to fire me. But at the end of the day, the situation worked out, and he told me that he was glad to know that at least I would be honest with him. And so that was one of those things where, like, living the way that I needed to live could have really resulted in a situation that sucked, but it was better than hiding. I had had enough of hiding, and I just couldn't hide anymore. And even as I say that, I know full well that I absolutely could start hiding again at any point. Because I'm still in a world that's affected by the fall, and I still have the flesh, and I still have, if I forget, and if I stop, with this process that I've been in now for 13 and a half years, I can go back to my old ways of thinking and believing and get scared again and start hiding again, which is why I have to stay connected to community.
Yeah. God, it's so interesting, Greg, because I just, I feel hesitant sometimes being critical of the church because it is the body of Christ. But I do think there's a culture of a fear of punishment that we've created. And I would love just to hear your thoughts of someone who's been in church, out of church, and how we can really, because you have hit on that many times, that was your upbringing, that was your upbringing, family and church, and how we can somehow resist that or find the alternative, the more redemptive one. Yeah.
It's funny, Cartwright, because I think that if you were to sit down with most evangelical pastors and have a one-on-one conversation like this, I think that you would get a lot of resonance and agreement that, oh yeah, God's not interested in punishing, but that's not what comes through. And I think that it's because there's a fear that if we're not super, super hard on sin, that people are going to do what Paul talked about in Romans 6, that we'll sin more, that grace might increase. And we want to try to control that somehow. And so what we do is we change the message into an unbiblical one with good motives. But the thing about punishment is, if God's posture towards us is to punish us, then he is not God.
Yeah.
Because he's not just. Because God, a just God, cannot punish the same sins twice. Yeah. And he put all of the punishment for all of my sin and all of your sin and all of everyone's sin on Jesus on the cross. And so anything that happens to me when I sin, it's not punishment.
Yeah.
What it's meant to be is loving, restorative, edifying, corrective discipline. Yeah. Which is completely different from punishment. And it's not that it's fun. I mean, Hebrews says that no discipline in the moment seems pleasant, but what it does is it produces the peaceful fruit of righteousness when we see that God is not allowing this consequence because he's angry, but because out of the sting of that consequence and the pain of it, it's going to help me to remember and focus on, I had forgotten who I was. Yeah. This is going to help channel me back to who I am and surrendering to him, which is going to be better for me. And it's going to be better and life-giving for everybody involved. And so if we could just say, like, and this is another Steve Brown, that God, if you are in Christ, God will never be angry with you again.
Wow.
And I can say that with authority. He will never be angry with you again. If I sin as a Christian, God's posture towards me is not anger, because when he looks at me, he is looking at me as a righteous person, just as righteous as Jesus, because that's what he's made me. And so I'm the one who's forgotten who I am. I'm having an identity crisis because I'm acting like the person that I used to be. And so what I need is to be reminded, this is who you are now. You are my beloved child. I have raised you up and seated you with your brother Jesus in the heavenlies. That is who you are. And I have plans for you. And if we don't reinforce that constantly within the church, Satan uses those messages of shame that have been boiling and cooking in our lives ever since childhood for most of us. And shame is a very convincing message. And we've got to communicate the messages of grace equally, if not more so than the messages of shame, or else shame is going to drown out grace messages, especially if we're ambiguous about them.
Yeah. Wow. That's good. That'll preach, Greg. Dang. So for my listeners, I mean, I kind of just want to end on this and, the happy story. I don't want to say happy ending because you're still in your redemptive arc with Jesus.
Well, happy ending with sex addicts has a kind of a different connotation.
That's right. I was thinking more Disney. There. Oops.
Yes. A pleasant outcome.
Right. So, I would love just to hear how you and your wife doing and what was that like and of just restoring your marriage. Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was wonderful and it was excruciating. And, she was severely traumatized by what I had done. I mean, she exhibited legit PTSD symptoms. I mean, she initially was extraordinarily gracious and forgiving, but I think some of that was the Holy Spirit and some of it was she was just in shock. And, she was just kind of in survival mode. She had kind of dissociated, I think, from the pain in order to survive it. And then when she did survive it, her emotion came back and she found her anger. And, that was hard for me because it was weeks into it before she ever really got furious. I'm like, wait, I thought we were doing so well. We were doing well. She needed to reconnect with her full range of emotions and let me know the impact that it had on her. And so, again, this was the beginning of honesty and true intimacy in our relationship. And we talked so much more than we had ever talked before. Our communication just became something totally different. Our sex life became something that was totally different, not in that it was bad before and it got hot all of a sudden, but what it was real. And it was something that was ours and we owned it. And so who cares if it looks like what anybody else says it should look like? This is ours. And so we began to talk about sex more than we ever had. I never thought we'd talk about it so much. But she needed that in order to feel safe re-engaging with me. I needed that to make sure that my head and my heart were in the right place. Because with sex addiction, it's a little bit different from alcoholism or drug addiction, because if you're an alcoholic or drug addict, you can just quit drinking or you can quit taking drugs, and you don't need those things in order to have a fulfilled life. If you're married, saying I'm never going to have sex again is not a great option. So you have to unlearn your unhealthy relationship with sex, and then you have to relearn how to have a healthy relationship with the same activity. And so that required for us a lot of talking, a lot of trust, and a lot of counseling. But, the first time I heard her say this, I just was shaking my head. I just couldn't, I believed it, but I couldn't believe it. She said, if it took going through that to get where we are now, if I had to, I'd take it again. And she says, don't get me wrong. I'm not inviting you to do that to me again. but if this was the only way, then she's like, I'm glad it happened this way. Yeah. And for me to say that makes a lot of sense. For her to say that, oh my gosh, that's gotta be a move of God. And here's the thing, God would have been just as good, and I could be just as healthy and recovering if she had done what she could have done and chosen to leave. Because I'm not saying that the only good path forward is staying married. That is not how it always works out. Mm-hmm. But I'm grateful that was our path. And so now we have been, in January of this year, we celebrate our 30th anniversary. Wow. So we've had 13 years of good marriage. We kind of can't wait for 34, because the day after our 34th anniversary, we will have been healthy as a couple longer than we were unhealthy as a couple. So we're really looking forward to that. Mm. It's just night and day different. We knew each other really well before. We got along really well before. We liked each other before really well, but we didn't have intimacy. We were just really good roommates, and now, we really have that deep, intimate soul connection that we always kind of knew was lacking. And so it's been amazing.
God, he wastes nothing, does he? He
really doesn't. Yeah. And the thing that I think about talking to you now that makes me excited is so many of the men I'm sure that you're talking to and who are coming to our meetings, they're coming younger than they used to. Mm-hmm. And part of that is sad because they've been using porn since they were 7 or 8 years old. Yeah. And so by the time they're in college, their blow up has happened. They know it's a problem, but they're coming before they've gotten married, and it hasn't wrecked a relationship yet. And I'm so grateful whenever that happens, when there's a young man who says, I can see where this is going and it's not good. And I just want to affirm anybody who's watching or listening to this, if you're like, I really don't want to take this into my marriage. Yes. 1,000 times you do not want to take this into your marriage.
Yeah.
You don't want to take an active addiction, and you don't want to take a secret. Even if you do the work and you're recovering and you're sober before you get married, you don't want to hide that. You want your potential wife to be able to choose to go into that relationship with you with all of the information, and that's a fear that we have. If we tell her everything, she's going to break up with me. Well, she might. That's one way that it could go. But if she doesn't and she chooses you, what does that feel like to have that type of acceptance when we were expecting rejection? Yeah. And so I can't say enough, if you're not married yet and you're trying to kick around what to do with this, find somebody immediately that you can tell your whole story to, get into counseling, find a recovery community. And if you're in a relationship, be looking for the soonest opportunity you can with the help of a professional to disclose what you've been dealing with so that the relationship can move forward really healthy.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Greg, I appreciate you coming on. Before you go, I'd love just to share more about, what you're doing and where people can find you.
Sure. Well, you mentioned earlier, awakenrecovery.com is our website. The main things that we offer recovery and support communities for men and for women, separate groups who are struggling with unwanted sexual behavior or addiction. We have groups for women who are recovering from sexual betrayal trauma. So we have 3 different ways, depending on what your experience is. We have 15 meetings every week between virtual and in person. For men, we've got in-person meetings in the Birmingham area 4 days a week. We got Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. We've got virtual meetings on Monday and Wednesday. We've got men's meetings in Montgomery, Prattville, Nashville, Cullman in person.
Wow.
And so, there are a lot of people who are going to see this or hear this that you're not too far away from an opportunity for a meeting. But if you've got a computer, you can join our Zoom meetings. So if you just connect using our contact form on the website, we'll give you all the information that you need. So the meetings is one thing. We offer intensives and workshops called the Roots Retreat. It's our men's recovery intensive, which is a 4-day therapist-led deep dive into sexual addiction, trauma, and recovery. And then the Roots Retreat women's workshop is a 1.5-day workshop for wives of sex addicts to help them better understand their husband's addiction and kind of some healthy relationship dynamics. So that's the second thing. Third thing is Stacey and I offer recovery coaching for men with me, women with her, and couples with the 2 of us. And then the fourth thing is we try to establish meaningful relationships with local churches, because we know how widespread this is, and no parachurch organization, no ministry, no counseling practice is going to be able to really give everybody struggling with this what they need. Our church leaders need to be trained and educated on how this works and how to be gracious, well-informed caregivers. And so we have an offering that we call ministry cohorts, where I meet with ministry leaders once a month over the course of a year and just kind of download all the things that we've learned to help them take that and distill it into their places of ministry to hopefully be more confident and better equipped caregivers.
Yeah.
You can find out about all those things on the website.
Yeah. Awakenrecovery.com. I hope y'all check it out. Well, Greg, thanks for coming on. This was a blast getting to hear your story, and I appreciate you sharing with us.
Thanks, Cartwright. It's great to be with you. I appreciate the opportunity.
One more thing before you go. If you're a man out there that's feeling a lack of purpose in your life and wanting that next step to feel excited about what you're doing in your everyday life, go to mentorforge.com. Sign up for a coaching session. The first one's free. And just check out my coaching, see how I can add value to you, as well as just getting you that purpose, man, getting you jacked up about what you're doing and where you're going. So mentorforge.com.